Welcome. Today we're going to be studying Likutei Sichos, Volume 12, Chelek Yud Beis, the first Sicha for Parshas Emor. We're not going to be studying it in the text, but we'll be going with the flow and the format as the Rebbe lays it out. Okay, here we go. Going to take a journey through Sfiras HaOmer, the time period we're in, counting the Omer, and it actually is the mitzvah in this week's Torah portion. This week's Parsha, we have the mitzvah, Usfartam lachem imacharas haShabbos. Hashem commands us. He says, I want you to count, each of you, I want you to count from the day after you rest on Pesach, the day after you celebrate the first day of Pesach and you rest, I'd like you, each of you, lachem, each of you to count, Sheva Shabbosos Temimos Tehiyana. I want you to count what? 7 weeks that should be, and the key operative word for our class today is Temimot. Temimos, complete, full weeks. And then we have a holiday called Shavuos weeks. We count that 7 weeks, so we have the Yom Tov of Shavuos. The Midrash Rabbi, in the book of Koheles and Ecclesiastes, tells us, Eimas Hayhem Temimos. Tell me, when do you have 7 complete weeks? Now, seemingly you have 7 complete weeks when you count 7 weeks. No. These are the cryptic words that the Midrash says. I quote, Bizman she'ein Yeshua u'shchanya beineim. You know when you have 7 weeks? When Yeshua and Shchenya, these two individuals, these two entities, do not exist in these weeks, that's when you have 7 complete weeks. Now, before I explain these cryptic words, let me explain what the Midrash is actually saying. It says, you know when you have 7 weeks, when the weeks are actually complete? When they begin on a Sunday. In other words, if Pesach is a Shabbos, the first day of Pesach is Shabbat. So when do you start counting? The first week is Sunday. And the first week ends on Shabbat. Next week begins on Sunday, ends on Shabbos. Third week begins on Sunday, ends on Shabbos, and so on and so forth, that each week begins on the calendar date of Sunday. Day number 1 is the first day of the week. Day number 2 is the second day of the week. And when you finish with your first week, 7, you've completed on Shabbat. And then you have the 7th week, which ends on a Shabbos, and of course Shavuos will be on a Sunday. That's what the Midrash means to say, but it says it in this cryptic fashion. It says, do you know when they're really complete? When you have calendar weeks, and that is expressed by Yeshua and Shchenya not existing in these weeks. What does that mean? So I'll explain for a few moments a little bit of background. I will say that if you check out the slideshow created for this Sikha, you can actually see it visualized. It might be easier to see it in a visual capacity than hearing or seeing me say it. The early prophets divided the Kohanim, all the Kohens, into 24 groups. And these groups are put in a rotation and a cycle. Each group works for 1 week a year. These groups are called mishmarais, a mishmar. Each mishmar gets 1 week, so it's not a bad deal. If you're a kohen, you work for 2 weeks a year, right? There are about 50 weeks in a year. You get 24 groups, so you get about 2 weeks a year, and you get paid for a full salary. Not bad. Now, on the holidays themselves, on the regalim, on the Yom Tovim, here, because the Jewish people came en masse to Yerushalayim, there were so many karbanas, so many offerings that had to be brought. So here, all hands on deck. We actually stopped the cycle. We put a cessation on this 24 rotation cycle, and all the Kohanim come to help out, and then we resume the cycle after. So if the cycle began in the beginning of Nisan, these two groups, group number 9 and 10, their names were Yeshua and Shchenya. Those are the names of the groups. So if the first day of Nisan is on a Shabbat, on a Shabbos, so now you have the first group number 1 comes in at the beginning of Nisan. They work until day number 7 of Nisan. They got their group. Okay. Day number 2 goes from day number 8 through 14. We got 2 groups in. Then Pesach, all hands on deck, which is exactly another week. Perfect. And then group number 3 begins after Pesach. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That ends. Shavuos is now on a Sunday, and group number 9 begins after Shavuos. So this group of Yeshua is not part. Yeshua and Shchenya, groups 9 and 10, are not in the 7 weeks between Pesach, or 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. If, however, dear friends, the first day of Nisan is in the middle of a week, then the cycle begins on the Shabbat before Nisan. In other words, group number 1 goes about half a week. Group number 2 is for another week, and group number 3 gets half a week. You have 3 groups before Pesach. Group number 4 will get its half a week after Pesach. Then you'll have group number 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then group number 10 will also get half a week. So you might have times where group number 9 and 10 are between Pesach and Shavuos. If you didn't get the technicalities, it's really not relevant for the rest of the Sikha. But the point is as follows, dear friends, that the Midrash is telling us that when do we have 7 complete weeks? When they begin on a Sunday. And when they begin on a Sunday, these 2 groups of Kohanim, Yeshua and Shechenya, did not work during this time period. And then you have really complete weeks. This is what the Midrash says, the Midrash Rabbah in Koheles. Fine. The Rebbe asks 2 fundamental basic questions here. Number 1, the Torah tells us that we have to have 7 complete weeks. And it tells us we always have to have 7 complete weeks. No matter what day of the week Pesach is on. Pesach doesn't always come on a Shabbat. Sometimes Pesach begins on a Sunday. Sometimes it begins on a Thursday. It begins on different days of the week. This year, Pesach was on a Thursday. We started counting on Friday. But the Torah tells us we have to have 7 complete weeks. Does the Medrash mean to say we only fulfill this mitzvah every once in a while when Pesach is on a Shabbos? Obviously not. That can't be the case. So what does the Medrash mean when it says that they're only complete when Pesach is on a Shabbos? As a matter of fact, all of us know we start counting the Omer and we begin counting at night. You know why we count at night? We count at night because we want to have a complete day. The day begins at night. At nightfall, that's when we have to count. We want to have 49 complete days. That's why we begin counting the Omer at night. If you start counting the Omer in the morning, you'd only get half a day. And many of us know as well that Shavuos, the holiday of Shavuos, after 49 days, we have this Yom Tov. Now, when we have Shabbos, sometimes we start Shabbos earlier. You can light the candles and make Kiddush as early as Plag HaMincha. You can take a little bit of Friday and annex that property, annex some of that space, and bring it over to Shabbat. But when it comes to Shavuos, we don't do that. Do you know why? Because we don't want to cut day number 49 short. We want to wait until we have tamimah, so we have completeness. So we always have completeness. We have to have completeness every year. How then, or why then, does the Medrash tell us that no, you only have completeness when Pesach comes on a Shabbos? Okay. The Gemara discusses this in Menachos as well. And this is question number 1. Question number 2, again, is something fairly obvious. If the Medrash wants to tell us that there's this special completeness when you have Pesach on a Shabbos and you begin counting on a Sunday, so say it! Tell us! Do you know when they're tamimas? When you start beginning your first count on the first day of the week on Sunday. Why this cryptic allusion to the mishmars of the Kohanim and Yeshua and Shechanya and these names, and we have to explain it, understand it? Why not just say it very straightforward in a straightforward manner? Why give us this remez, this hint? What is the reason for this? So these questions, with this introduction, we can begin our journey into the Sikha for today. And as is the case many times throughout the Rebbe's Sikhas, the questions themselves are the answers. What do I mean by that? The question was, how can the Medrash possibly be telling us that the only time we have tamimus, the only time we have completeness, is when we begin counting on a Sunday? The answer is, obviously, that's not what the Medrash is telling us. Obviously, we must have completeness every year. There must be tamimus every year, but there may be something above and beyond, something unique, something different about a year when Pesach is on Shabbos and we begin counting on Sunday. Indeed, the word tamimus itself, tamim, completeness. You can be complete because you're not missing anything, or you can be complete because you have something above and beyond extraordinary. You can be alive because you're not dead, or you can be alive because you're filled with life. Sometimes we call a year, we say this year is a complete year. Sometimes we mean, well, it's not, we had a complete year, I didn't miss any days. Or sometimes we mean, no, it was an extraordinary year, it actually had a leap month in it. It was a tamim, it was extraordinary. Sometimes the word tamim can mean we have completeness, which is defined by what it's not. I'm complete because I am not missing anything. Or you can have completeness that has its own identity and definition, which is above and beyond regular completeness. And this, therefore, is the answer. The question was, what does the Medrash mean? How can the Medrash tell us that we're only going to have completeness when we begin counting on Sunday? The answer is, well, there's different types of completeness. Yes, obviously you have completeness every year. We start counting the Omer at night, as I mentioned, and we make sure to have 49 complete days. But there's some extraordinary completeness that is expressed when we count on a Sunday. And that extraordinary completeness expresses itself through this hint, this cryptic hint of Yeshua and Shechanya. Somehow, Yeshua and Shechanya not being present is somehow the cryptic hint that helps us understand what this special, extraordinary completeness is. So we already have the answers, we just have to now study it. But many times the Rebbe structures it in that way. It's beautiful. We know what direction we're heading. We know that we're headed to understand there's something extraordinary, an extraordinary dimension of completeness that we're going to unearth and uncover. And somehow that extraordinary dimension of completeness is expressed through Yeshua and Shechanya not being present. These two groups of Kohanim not working in that time period, Yeshua and Shechanya not being present, somehow expresses and tells us what's unique about this special Tamimis. Okay. Let's move to a different Midrash. A different Midrash. Till now we've been talking about the Midrash in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes. Now, the Midrash in our Parsha, on our Pasuk, the Midrash Rabbah, also comments and actually asks the exact same question. Asks, Masai heim tamimis, when do we have completeness? However, here the Midrash gives a different answer. It says, you know when you have completeness? When the Jewish people are oisin retzonai shel makom. Osin retzonai shel makom, when the Jewish people are fulfilling the will of God. God here in this context is referred to as makom, as a place. We'll talk about that soon. So, if we count the Emor, we do the mitzvah, but the Jewish people are not dedicated to the service of Hashem, then we don't have this completeness. You know, when you have completeness, you have this completeness when the Jewish people are dedicated to fulfilling the will of God, then we have this completeness. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, these two midrashes are not contradictory, they are complementary. In other words, there are two ways we can reach this extraordinary tamimas, this dimension that we'll talk about and we'll discuss in our Sikha today. There are two ways that we can get there. Number one is by virtue of the calendar. If it should so happen that Pesach is on a Shabbos and you begin counting on Sunday, you got it. There's something extraordinary in the air now, and this extra tamima, this perfection, this extra dimension is present. However, what if, like this year Pesach was on a Thursday, and we began counting the Emor on a Friday? Are we not able to have this extra level of completeness? No. That's where the Midrash on this parsha says, if we are oisin retzonai shel makom, if we fulfill the will of God, then we can have that same tamimis, that same completion, extraordinary perfection that exists on years when Pesach is on a Shabbos and we begin counting on Sunday. So perfection. You are perfect because you're not missing anything. That we always have. Because that's always perfection. You got to have 49 complete days. Extraordinary perfection? Well, you got two options for that. You got the Midrash in Koheles that tells us that exists when you begin counting on Sunday, and you have the Midrash in our Parsha that tells us that exists when we are oisin retzonai shel makom. So these are the same thing. So if we'll understand what oisin retzonai shel makom is, whatever that's supposed to mean, then we will understand what the greatness and the beauty of beginning to count on Sunday is. So let's go. Here we go. This sikha requires a little more patience, but the reward is truly worth it. Here we go. It says in the Gemara in Brachos, it tells us that the sentence, we read it many times in our Shema, the sentence in the Torah, the book of Devoran tells us, Via safta de genecha. Jewish people, I'm going to give you rain. You're going to be able to harvest your produce and your grain. A great blessing that we're given, says the Midrash, that exists bizman she'ein oisin retzonai shel makom. You know when we have this seemingly to be blessing, we have rain and we get to harvest the field, that's when we don't fulfill the will of the makom, the will of the place, the will of God. Seems rather strange The reason that seems rather strange is because the sentences right before that in the Torah say, if you will fulfill my commandments, you'll listen to what I say, then I will bring rain and I'll let you harvest your crop and your grain and you'll have wonderful blessings. That doesn't seem to be a time when we're not doing the divine will. I mean, things could get better. God could do it for us. That's true. But why would the Talmud, why would the Gemara tell us that this statement, when we're fulfilling God's will, seemingly we're fulfilling the commandments, what's missing? What are we doing wrong? We're harvesting the grain? No. This is not called fulfilling God's will. Do you know why? The answer is because in that paragraph there is a key word that is missing. The key word that is missing is b'chol ma'idecha. We know the first paragraph of Shema, we're familiar with it. It says, you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all ma'idecha. Translated usually loosely as your might, your ma'od, your very. In the next paragraph of Shema, which is in the next Torah portion, which is what we just quoted, it says you love God with all your heart. You gotta love God with all your soul. But those words, b'chol ma'idcha, with all your ma'od. Ma'od literally means your very. With all your very, in an extraordinary way, that's missing. And hence, you're fulfilling the commandments, that's true. But what are we not doing? We're not oisen ritzoinoi shel makom. Here we have what the definition of ritzoinoi shel makom. When we talk about ratzon, my desire, there's me, where I am, and there's where I desire to be. We know we have this statement, a person is wherever their will, their desire, their passions, their hopes, their dreams, that's where they are. In other words, there's me, and then there's my ratzon. My ratzon usually refers to something which I dream about, I want, I wish, I will to happen. God also, we can connect to Him on different ways. We can have b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. That's not such a bad thing, to love God with all your heart and with all your soul. But then there's connecting to ma'idcha, the very. When we say very, we mean not 100%, we mean 101%. We mean something above and beyond the norm. That is what we mean when we say the word ratzon. God's ratzon, ritzoinoi, His will, His desire, His passion to connect, to not just Him, to connect to Hashem in an extraordinary fashion. We'll talk about this in a few moments. But the next word in that statement is of equal importance. Ritzoinoi shel makom. The will of, and here we don't say the will of God. We refer to God as makom, the space. Why do we refer to God as the space? And this is many times we refer to Hashem as the space. Well, I fill space. I'm called an American because I dwell within the country of America, and I define by the space I exist in. Well, God doesn't exist in a space. We exist in God's space. God is the creator of a space, the creator of dimensions, the creator of this world. We are all in the makom of God. God isn't in a space. The space is within God. Ritzoinoi shel makom. The will, the desire, the passion of makom, of Hashem who made a space. Do you know what Oised Ritzoinoi shel makom means according to Chassidus? It means being able to act in an extraordinary fashion within everyday life. Having ritzoinoi, being able to have this 101% of ma'idcha, going above and beyond, and bringing that feeling within the confines, the dimensions of makom, of space, of regularity. Making the unnatural natural. Making the extraordinary ordinary. Making the super regular regular. That is what we mean, Oised Ritzoinoi shel makom. And therefore, there are two modes of existence. Yes, we commit to Hashem, we follow His commandments, and you know what? There are great blessings for that. But that's not the ultimate. If we want to see something extraordinary, if we want to connect to Ritzoinoi shel makom, do you know what that happens? When we go 101%, we go a little bit, in the modern vernacular, we would say going beyond yourself, transcending yourself. Those are new agey words. But what we mean is doing something above and beyond what we thought we could do. Taking an extra step, that's rotzin. Here we are connecting to part of Hashem, which is not the norm within our lives. Making that makim, making that normal. And this, dear friends, is what Sfiras HaOmer is all about. The word Omer, counting the Omer. Let's just talk about those two words. What is an Omer? An Omer is a measurement. On the second day of Pesach, on the day after Pesach, there was a special offering that was brought, and a certain measurement of grain was brought into the Mishkan, into the Beis HaMikdash, on the altar, as part of the offering. Omer is a measurement. You know what grain they used? If you use any grain, normally you would think they'd use wheat. Ask you to name a grain. That's the normative, regular staple of human consumption. No. They used barley. And the reason they used barley is for the same reason the barley is only used twice on the altar. In the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash, barley is used twice. It's used once for a woman who has strayed away and been perhaps unfaithful to her spouse, and it's used in this context. The barley is usually the food of animals. Barley refers to the uncouth. Barley refers to the raw, the rough, the non-human, the animalistic. That's the word Omer. What is the word Sephira? Count the Omer. The word Sephira is related and comes from the word Sapir. Sapir means to shine, to brighten, to illuminate. Sfiras HaOmer means, on a deeper level, to brighten, to illuminate, and to have shine this Omer of barley, this animal. To take something extraordinary, this shining light, and to bring it to my Omer, to bring it into my everyday, regular, the world of confines of time, of space, this life that I live in a physical sense, in an animalistic, my bodily sense, to make that sapir, to make that shine. And that's why, do you know when Sfiras HaOmer is Tamimos? When is Sfiras HaOmer Tamimos? When is the shining of this Omer of barley, of this animal? When is it perfect? When it's Oisin Ritzainai Shalmachem. When I can take something extraordinary. When do I have this extraordinary perfection? With the second level of perfection we talked about, the second level of Tamimos, of completion. When I go above and beyond, then what happens? I bring that into my animal. I bring it into my Omer. I make it part of my regular day life. Then I am Oisin Ritzainai Shamakim. Then I truly do have Tamimos. So this is what the Midrash on this week's Torah portion means. When is it Tamimos? When we are Oisin Ritzainai Shamakim. And dear friends, this now is what that first Midrash we began with. What the Midrash in Koheles, this is what that Midrash means to. That same thing occurs every time we start counting on a Sunday. Why? I mean, I can understand why it would be complete and why I have an extra dimension of completion when I dedicate myself b'chol ma'idcha, with all my very, when I go above and beyond, when I take 100%, and when I make that part of my everyday life, I make it part of my makom, I make it part of my omer. I'd understand why that is extra perfection. But what's so special about beginning to count on a Sunday? We have different calendar cycles that exist all simultaneously. We have the monthly cycle of days, 1 through 29 or 30. The moon begins, it's born, so to speak. The first crescent of the moon appears over Jerusalem at the beginning of the month. Then it becomes a full moon in the middle of the month. And then it wanes and the cycle continues. We also have an annual cycle. We have seasons. We're in now the spring. We're now moving towards summer. And we have the solar cycle of the year. Together with that, we also have a weekly cycle. Sunday through Shabbos, Yom Rishon, all the way through Shabbos. That 7-day cycle. And there's a fundamental difference between, on the one hand, the lunar and solar cycles, the monthly and annual cycle, and on the other hand, the weekly cycle. The weekly cycle continues nonstop, never changing, in a circular fashion, ever since the creation of the world. That cycle has never ceased to stop. It exists, it continues, round and round it goes, never changing, never moving. The lunar cycle, Well, the word itself, chodesh, chadash, implies something new, something novel, something different. There's a new energy that comes into the world. We sort of count 1 through 29, 1 through 30. It goes in a linear fashion. We have an up, we have a down, we have a change. The moon is here, the cycle changes this way. The annual cycle the same way. We have winter, we have spring, we have summer. The sun is closer to us, it's further from us. It's colder, it's hotter. There's this change, there's this linear cycle that sort of perpetuates and goes and changes. The weekly cycle doesn't care about that. It just continues. The regular, the normal, each and every day without change. Just continues each and every day. Continues round and round. There are these two energies in the world, dear friends. There is this energy of novelty, of newness. Every year on Rosh Hashanah, new energy comes into the world, an annual energy. Every day on Rosh Chodesh, right? We know that many people fast before the day before Rosh Chodesh, or they prepare themselves for the new month. A new energy, chadash, there's some newness, there's something that's going to, novel that's going to occur, that's going to take place in this world. The week keeps on going. Doesn't care. Doesn't make a difference if it's a weekday, a Shabbat. Doesn't make a difference if the world is in this state of being, in that state of being. It continues marching order over and over again. Yes, we have the regular, and yes, we have the novel, the new and the regular. You know what happens on a year when we count the Omer? Beginning on a Sunday, we sync the two cycles. The weekly cycle, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. And the counting of the months, the counting of the years, it's all in sync. It's all in cycle. All of a sudden, when I'm counting the Omer, I'm saying today is a week of counting. This mitzvah actually fits together with the weekly cycle. They fit together. What's happening in the regular and what's happening in the realm of my mitzvah counting are now in sync. Doesn't that sound familiar with what we said before? Osin risono shel makom. The supernatural and the natural, the irregular and the regular, the extraordinary and the ordinary are in sync, come together. The ability to have this great mitzvah of counting the Omer and the ability for it to affect the regular Sunday, Monday, Tuesday cycle of our lives, that happens naturally. Yes, that occurs naturally on a year when Pesach begins on a Shabbos, and on a year when we begin counting on a Sunday. And as in every detail of Torah, and especially as illuminated through Sichos, and those of us who are learning Sichos on this incredible cycle of mastering the entire Likutei Sichos, if there's one message we get from the entire Torah of our Rebbe, that is that every detail in Torah is b'hashgacha pratis. It wasn't just, hey, they found a really cute way of expressing this idea. A very cute way of expressing it is that when it begins on a Sunday, then the groups of Kohanim, the Mishmars of Yeshua and Shechenya, those two groups, they're not included. So that's a clever way of this remez of hinting to this. No. This hint actually expresses everything about this. The hint itself gives us the message. What are the two names of the groups again? Yeshua and Shechanya. What does Yeshua mean? Lahishia, salvation. What does Shechanya mean? Shechina, to dwell. Yeshua and Shechanya. These two components. Yeshua, the salvation of Hashem. Shechanya, Hashem Shechina. Dwelling, resting within the makom, within the space, within the confines of time and space, the makom. Yeshua and Shechanya. When you do not have Yeshua and Shechanya, you have a year where we are not osin ritzono shel makom. We don't have ritzono and makom. We don't have extraordinary and ordinary. Yeshua and Shechanya are not there. They don't exist in the Omer. They don't exist in these 6 weeks. Aha, they don't exist in these 6 weeks. You still have Tamimos. You have Tamimos by virtue of them not, they don't exist. You have Tamimos by it being on Sunday. This sync between the regular, the extraordinary, and the ordinary, that exists. And Yeshua and Shechanya are not there. You don't have Ritzon Hashem Makom. But this does exist. Here you have these two midrashim. They complement each other beautifully. So we can have it either we can do it, or it can happen by virtue of being on the calendar. Dear friends, may we merit. This year, we do not have the calendar in the sync of it going on its own. So we got to work on it on itself. We need to have Yeshua and Shechanya this year. Oh boy, we need to have them in the count. not next year, but perhaps the year after, I believe, then Pesach will be on a Shabbos. Then maybe we won't have to have the Yeshua and Shchania. That will happen naturally by virtue of the calendar. Agutin, thank you very much for joining us.